Shaunavon, born in 1913, now approaching its 75th Jubilee. My town, then typical of the West, now sedate, mature, but still with a lot of life in the old girl. The town where I was raised, where I was educated, where I spent my life, and where I will probably die. Now one of the very few left of those who came here in 1913. In fact, of the original 60 businesses who established here after the historic sale of lot for the town site at Gull Lake on September the 17th, 1913, the last three, to my knowledge, that were still in business were F.G. Horsey, George Barr, and Josh Fennell of Fennell's Hardware. One of the few women making her home here in the fall of 13 was Mrs. Ann Stevenson, who delighted in regaling her friends with tales of early days. She, too, is gone. Probably the only students residing here out of the 30 who attended the temporary school held in the newly built Baptist church is Mrs. Lou Sargent. I started to school in the fall of 14 to the newly built one-room building on the site of the present school setup, intended to hold a classroom of from 40 to 50. Imagine the consternation when the first morning 99 registered. My first month at school was spent in that crowded room with a teacher at the front and one at the back, and the students crushed 3 onto a bench. However, by Thanksgiving, a room had been added, and now I probably am the only one left of that beginner's class. 2 of the last to pass on were Isabel Pickett and Gordon Mackenzie. Much credit goes to those first teachers, Miss Carefoot in the fall of 13 and Mrs. Claggett in the spring of 14, who held classes in the Baptist church, and Miss Edna McDermott and Mrs. Janet Middlemass, principal of the first school. The latter, a dedicated teacher, devoted her life to the profession, and only recently died in Tucson, Arizona. In perusing old standards, I note that I had the dubious honor of being the first graduate to have completed her education in the Shaunavon schools. That early school gave way to a 4-room brick structure in 1915, and the old one was moved to its present site on the corner of Center and 4th Avenue to become the Methodist Church, serving that pastorate until the present Center Street United Church was built in 1929. Now it is occupied by the green slate business and the jewel shop. Today, our complex of schools is a far cry from that early classroom, which, as overcrowding bulged its seams, was added to and replaced until today. Our schools, with their up-to-date equipment, labs, auditoriums, compare favorably with any in the province. The last edition was officially opened in March of 1988. Their development is a tale in itself. As a student, I attended its classes in all but the new Division 3 and 4, both of which I taught in. Some held in the old school after it became a church, in what became a grocery, then a residence, and in the building that now houses our museum. Not all was a model student. They hold fond memories of escapades, fellow students, wonderful teachers, and in later years, close association with my own students. My intention was to start my talk with the early history. Forgive me when I digress and skip back and forth through the decades, as did the Jalna story. I must make clear that my story is not that of the surrounding district, but of the town itself. But in passing, I pay tribute to the early settlers who took up their homesteads prior to 1913 and whose descendants still dwell in this area, attend our schools, set up businesses, and stayed to augment the prosperity of the town. The original town site was owned by 3 of them, William Ganley, Pat Ganley, father of Jerome, and Thomas McNeely. Purchased by the CPR as a town site when the steel pushed slowly westward from Assiniboia, rumor marked it as a future divisional point for the line's extension to Lethbridge and perhaps a branch line to connect it with Swift Current. Men eagerly stood in line when the lots for the new town site went on sale in Gull Lake the morning of September the 17th, 1913, anxious to acquire the lots they had chosen. 370 were sold in the next 8 hours for a sum of $210,000. One story tells of a man who sold his place in the lineup to a future hardware man, Pete Naismith, for $500. Of the 60 businesses to be immediately established by purchasers, only 4 were still in operation in the last decade: the F.G. Horsey Insurance and Real Estate, the Bar Lumber Company, the Royal Bank, then the Union, and the Shaunavon Standard, the local weekly. The name chosen for the new town site has been a matter of dispute for decades. Commonly pronounced Shaunavon, it has been claimed to be a combination of Shaun from Shaughnessy and Vaughan after Van Horn of the CPR. Now tell me, how can you get the last syllable, Vaughan, from a man's name that was Van? To me, Shaunavon is a careless contraction of the correct Shaunavon. I have always strongly supported the theory that it was named after Lord Shaughnessy and his estate in the Old Country Avon, and was delighted when Mr. Horsey assured me that he had personally been in the CPR office in Calgary when Lord Shaughnessy had wired asking them to call it after his home village in the Old Country, Shaunavon, not Shaughnessy. Our school was called Strathcona, after Lord Strathcona, also a railway builder. The surrounding area was originally served by the post offices of Dollard and Kelstone to the northeast, and country stores had been set there. However, with the pushing westward of the steel, many squatters moved on to the northern edge of what is now the town and erected buildings on skids, ready to move them to permanent locations after the sale of lots, and no time was lost in moving those 20 buildings to the newly acquired properties. It is of interest to note that the second issue of the Standard describes moving day. Its 4 ton of equipment had to be removed piece by piece along to lighten the load, and this disruption was the cause of that issue not being up to par. Its new location then was on 3rd Avenue East. Later it was moved to the corner of Center and 4th. And now it occupies a building that first was the Binkley Funeral Parlor and Furniture Store. Then it became a bowling alley, a Safeway store, and before being renovated to become the home of our weekly paper, the Mitchell Groceteria. My father was one of those who stood in line to purchase property. His small office building still stands to the south of the old Pioneer Hardware. He opened it in October and moved his family here in early December. I still recall that trip, December the 9th, from Gull Lake in a flivver taxi. I had insisted on sharing my father's breakfast of pork chops, and I was car sick every mile of the way. That fall was open, warm, and dry, with no snow till the new year. So dry that a grass fire burned about the few homes in that early residential section. Our home was only a 2-room shack, scantily furnished, for there are no trains yet with freight. It was added to the next summer. I believe I truly horrified a newcomer to town when I visited her with the welcome wagon, and I let slip that I had lived in her newly purchased home from 1913 to 1922. Growth was so rapid that by November the 27th, 1913, Shaunavon was incorporated as a village. The following Saturday, November 29th, the steel arrived, and the first train, a work train, pulled slowly in. School opened November the 15th in the newly built Baptist church. Elections for the first council were held December the 15th. 101 voted, and the late Robert Roycroft, Percy Wood, and James McCoubry led a victory parade to the Princess Theatre, where each voiced his faith in a promising future for the new village. My father became the first secretary-treasurer. He was succeeded by Mr. Horsey, who retained the position for 43 years. One of the first projects of the new council was the construction of plank sidewalks. Today, because of storm sewers, it is not realized that the center of town is in reality a slough, extending from east of the park to west of the present co-op. Come spring, melting snow formed a fair-sized body of water, ideal for rafting on storm doors with apple box floats. But alas, in some instances, the new sidewalks floated off too, or necessitated brick-raised planks to enable one to avoid the several inches of water flowing over them. The steel was followed by freights and the arrival of household goods, but a break-in prevented us from removing ours, and our Christmas guests had to sit on apple boxes. The freight trains became mixed trains, then daily passenger to and from Moose Jaw. And as the steel moved on in 1915, a train serving the area to Council, and later down to the south and back to Val-Marie, that train left tri-weekly. Service which helped make Shaunavon a distributing point for the southwest corner of the province, and until improved highways and trucking services replaced much of the rail service, a stopover for commercial facilities. By January the 13th, the population was well over 700. An application was made to incorporate the new town as a village as a town. At a banquet to honor pioneers of the district on the occasion of our Golden Jubilee in 1963, Premier Lloyd presented the town with copies of the documents authorizing Shaunavon's incorporation as a village in November 27, 1913, and as a town on October 27, 1914, commenting that never had a new settlement become a village and then a town within a year of its founding, and that the government of Sir Walter Scott had to enact special legislation to do so. Statistics quote the following: in less than a year, 85 businesses had been established, and the population of early 1914 was 714. Between September the 17th of 13 and January the 14th of 14, there had been a population increase of 6.5 people per day, and 2.5 buildings completed each working day. Though at one time our population was close to 3,000, the last census in 1986 showed only 2,138, and in business establishments few more than in the early years. But that is no indication that we are not still a thriving and prosperous community. I note that at that time we had 3 doctors serve this same area: Dr. Shaw, Dr. Hicks, and the well-known Dr. J.B. Swanson. We are told that the town site was chosen by the CPR because here was a water supply par excellence. Shaunavon alone, lying along a more or less alkali tract extending along the CPR roadbed, has an almost inexhaustible supply of fresh, soft water, so good that it was deemed suitable to supply the Queen's train when she toured Canada in 1939. Geologically, we are presumed to be above an underground lake or river, from which deep wells have produced for pressure tanks that supply which made Shaunavon modern long before a town water system was installed in 1960. It has enabled Shaunavon to blossom, a veritable oasis in a treeless section of rolling prairie. Our tree-lined streets, lush lawns and gardens, and our town park depend upon it, for this is an area with limited rainfall and gusty, drying winds, hot summers, cold winters, yet amazingly often referred to as the banana belt of the prairies. Its temperature is, as a rule, about 10 degrees warmer than the eastern sections of the province, and in the winter the famed Chinooks sweep around the Cypress Hills, bringing an upward surge in the temperature that will bring as much as a 60-degree rise. It was not uncommon for us to go to bed with a 20 below reading and awake with water on the streets. If you are home for the 75th, you will have driven through our tree-lined paved streets, seen our 40-bed hospital, the nursing home, and Pioneer Lodge, noted our well-kept residential areas, the schools, rinks, swimming pool, library, and museum. Let me digress to speak of the park. It was first established in 1922. It then had 20 lone poplars. Later, its northern section was used for a skating and curling rink. Much credit must go to the late Bill Sharp and the late T.J.E. Campbell for its present beauty. Until today, with its JC-sponsored playground and campsite, inviting shady nooks and picnic areas, it is, I am sure, one of the loveliest in the province. The central cairn is a monument to the fallen of 2 world wars. The composite group of skating rink, curling rink with artificial ice and adjacent swimming pool are a fine, and tennis courts and ball grounds are a fine recreational center, a far cry from the first outdoor rink on the site of the old Catholic rectory on the corner of Fifth Avenue and First Street East, or the first pool across from a creamery supplied with heated water from the nearby powerhouse. Shaunavonites have always been sports-minded. There has been an annual rodeo, sports day, and fair ever since the first rodeo held July the 1st, 1914, at the site of the present water tower. When such famed cowboys as Slippers, Buck Murphy, Ira Triplett, Alec Laframboy, Buck Hardin, Hugo McGuire, Harry Otterson, and Roy DeGraw participated, and Indians entertained to the beat of tom-toms. Albert Stevenson, who still lives here, won the prize for the smallest baby in the baby show. At that time, the area to the north and south of the town site were stopovers for cattle drives to and from seasonal pastures of such ranches as the Turkey Trot and the Tea-Down, and their cowboys were not averse to shooting up the town and riding their horses into the bars of the two fine hotels, the Empress Hoban and the Kennedy, the former on the site of the present Shaunavon Hotel, and the latter where Husky Oil is. To the north of the rinks was the fairground, the scene of the present Shawnee rodeos until they moved west of town. Our ball tournaments and league games, our ball and hockey clubs, are known as the Badgers. The badger has been our emblem and has been prominently displayed at such events as the Silver Jubilee, the town's Golden Jubilee, the Centennial, and at Homecoming 71. George Archambault was also the owner of the first theater, The Princess, erected in 1913, and replaced by the first Idle Hour owned by Shipman Brothers in 1915 on the corner of Center and 4th Avenue, the forerunner of the excellent Idle Hour of today. The Princess, overhead a rooming house, still stands, the Bastura block. It then served as a theater and dance hall. The bricks for its chimney sold in Gull Lake for $9 and cost $22 to haul here. It was the scene of the first election of town officers, of the organization of the school district, and on Sunday church services. The Anglicans met there with the United Church for some time prior to the establishment of their first church in 1915. This theater also laid claim to being the site of the first curling game to be played in town. This took place at the New Year's Ball, when it is told that my father, being a curler of some repute, organized a curling game at the supper hour, using the chamber pots from the rooming house above as stones. Off to a good start, curling to this day, despite frequent winter thaws, has an enthusiastic following. W.J. Cochran curled his best years in Shaunavon. He was only one of many well-known curlers, such as T.J.E. Campbell and George Barr Sr. A roller skating rink, numerous billiard and pool halls, bowling lanes, trap shooting are only some of the recreation enjoyed through the decades, and I'm afraid a flourishing poker game must be added to the list. In my teens, the Saturday night dances were enjoyed by hundreds from miles around, and old-timers call to mind such musicians as Doug Shackle, Mel Talon, Ron Sadler, and Frenchy LaRoe. One local lady was prone to sing this ditty to extol the high spirits of fun-loving Shaunavonites. Instow is a bubble, Scotsguard a fire trap. Admiral is a farming town, and Creighton's off the map. You can buy the whole of Cadillac for a nickel and a dime, but it's hobnail boots and flannel shirts and Shaunavon for mine. So sing a little town of Shaunavon. If you don't live there, that's your fault. Oh, you Shaunavon, you're the best old town I know, where all the married women are handsome, and you lead a life and then some. Oh, you Shaunavon, the best old town I know. Sinners and saints, the pioneer spirit lived on, and few native sons or daughters do not agree heartily that Shaunavon is the best. Today, Shaunavon boasts one of the largest and most diversified communities in the province. In an article written for the Leader Post in 1966, H. Longman wrote of Shaunavon, take 2 million bushels of hard spring wheat, $2 million worth of fat range cattle, 7.5 million barrels of medium gravity crude oil, and you have this southwest Saskatchewan's towns. Basic recipe for prosperity. Season it with a hell for leather philosophy, garnish with a generous sprinkling of sound civic administration, and the result is progress. The grain and cattle industry built our town in the past. Since 1952, the oil industry has added to it. Marathon, then Aberford, now Encore, and the subsidiary facets of the oil industry have bought new payrolls and families to operate the fields and pipelines that form it. New activity centers round a pipeline through here to Montana, and the rocking motion of the pumps is almost as familiar as the whir of large combines and modern machinery that replaced the old steam drum equipment of early days. In '81, Alaskan Pipeline crossed Highway 13 and 37 down to the border to Val Marie. To the west lie the Cypress Hills, popular picnic area. Easy access to their many beautiful coulees made them favorite spots for Sunday gatherings and berry-picking expeditions since the day of the horse and buggy and the Model T, as well as Pine Cree, the Cypress Provincial Park. Shaunavonites frequent the watershed that is built up behind Duncairn Dam, beloved by local fishermen for its pickerel, jack, and perch. East of it lies Lake Pelche, also a holiday site. All these areas except Pine Cree are sites of summer cabins. At the south end of Duncairn, the majority of cabins are owned by people from Shaunavon, and Ferguson Bay bears the name of our late sheriff. You, of course, know that this corner of the province is rich in fossil beds, and you will see some of the finds if you visit the Shaunavon and East End museums. As children, my peers and I looked for fossil finds in the lignite coal that filled the cellars and heated our homes. Beds of this soft coal are both to the north and south of town, at first dug from tunnels into the hillsides, later to be strip mined. In 1913, the Standard advertised it for $3.75 per ton delivered at the door. Housewives of today with modern electric ranges cannot imagine the strategy needed to keep it burning, nor can the man of today's gas-heated house realize the amount of ashes that had to be carried to the lane. However, it was a cheap form of fuel widely used until after the Depression years. During that time, I understand that relief orders for 2 tons of it were often used as barter at the grocery stores. One seam of coal to the south of town caught fire and burned for many years, and miners of that day are said to have operated a still from the heat. Favored in so many ways, Shaunavon met and rose above the hardships of the Depression years. It has had more than its share of drought, dust storms, insect plagues, devastating fires that destroyed parts of the early town. In December of 14, the Empress Hotel burned, with it a pool hall, cafe, and rooming house. Women operated a bucket brigade to help put the fire out. It was rebuilt by Hoban and Keith, and is still a shell of the present Shaunavon Hotel. The most disastrous fire occurred on June the 15th, 1918. That night, fire broke out in the posh Kennedy Hotel on the northwest corner of Center Street and 3rd Avenue. The pride of the town, spreading till by morning 18 businesses had been consumed. The hotel was not rebuilt, but with surprising resilience, the most of the businesses were. 'Tis said that Morrison Drug was open for business by noon the next day with a supply of drugs brought from Gull Lake. Stevenson Brothers General Merchants reopened in what was the Mercantile Block, now the site of the Red Rooster. Billy, 'tis said, had wired an order for groceries to Winnipeg before the fire was even out. That enterprising firm then rebuilt on the hotel site, and when that building burned in the early 30s, they built the Avon Block, operating there until Billy was accidentally killed. In the fall of 18, the flu swept through the district. The new brick school was pressed into service with army cots as bed, and few were the families who did not mourn the loss of relatives or friends. In this short time, I've tried to tell you the highlights of Shaunavon's early history, something of its past and present economy, and of changes wrought through the 75 years. Probably its story is not too different from the story of your own hometown. I've spoken little of the wonderful work done by churches, its clubs, its lodges, and the community-minded organizations, or the contribution to it of so many wonderful people. Yet I hope I have given you a small insight into its zesty past and the spirit that has imbued its sons and daughters, so that wherever they roam, Shaunavon is still home, one that 1,500 returned to in Homecoming 71, and so many more of their descendants will be here for its 75th in 1988. Some of you who will have returned to help celebrate our 75th hardly recognize the early business sites. We regret the disappearance of our station and the old brick schools. The Strathcona, built in 19 14, added to in 1917. The Shaunavon built in 1927, but there are still buildings to be remembered on Center Street, especially between Railway and 4th Avenue. The Bastura building was the Princess Theatre, dance hall, and meeting place. The cafe across from Binkley's funeral parlor, the Old Rex. Walter's Home Furnishing, the Jack Woods Limited Men's Ready-to-Wear. Sun Industries was McNichol and Brown, a grocery. Fennell's Hardware still stands. The Thompson Jewelry, now vacant, was the shop of Thomas Bucknell, who sold out, being conscripted to go to war in 1918. The Mercantile Block disappeared to make way for the Red Rooster. Mark King's Barber Shop and Crawford's Jewelry were pushed back to form the site of Porter and Green's Drugstore, which is now part of Eng's, originally the Naismith Hardware. 2 of the 3 fine brick banks are still standing. The Royal, or Union as it was then, is housing the offices of the Royal Municipality of Arlington. The Commerce has become Binkley's funeral parlor. The Montreal on the northeast corner of 3rd and Centre was gutted in the fire of 18. Rebuilt then, when they closed out, it was sold to Marathon Oil. In 1968, it was torn down to become the present Royal Bank. The first post office north of the Kennedy Hotel also burned in 1918, and T.J. Campbell, the postmaster, built the Campbell Block to house it. The new post office on 2nd Avenue replaced it, and the Campbell Block became a business block. If an old-timer, you'll remember Miss Gonce's Dress Shop, Munden's Bakery, Shipman's Butcher Shop, and Burnier's Jewelry. North of the Campbell Block, there was Mrs. Hurley's Millinery, now a florist shop. Nadler's became the photographers, and Mrs. Leslie's salon, Dr. Cashvera's office. Harter's Tinsmith and the Mallory home became the modern co-op complex. This covers 75 years of growth and change. But if nostalgia has brought you home from wherever you now reside, be you a pioneer or a descendant of the town or district, it will hold close memories for you as it does for me. Okay, Fred.